In our final part of this episode with Tim Kenny, we're discussing added detail in level 3 reports versus sort of level 2. So I think the first bit that would be interesting to discuss is so I suppose when and how to recommend further investigations in a level 3, and with that, potentially when does recommending further investigations become too caveat based and and annoying.
First thing I'll say on it is that I've seen and heard opinions from surveyors who say if you have to recommend further investigation on level 3, you're not competent to do it. That's garbage. I'll just flat out say it. I'm not even going to, try and sugarcoat my answer on that one. In fact, I would go further to say there are situations where if you are not recommending further investigations within any level of report, your reports are not compliant with the Home Survey standards. Right? If you're not recommending them in certain situations, you are not complying with the Home Survey standards. It very clear. I mean, again, there is more work to be done to express the requirements around further investigations clearer in standards. But one of the things they say is that, you can't use a further investigation just because you can't see something, right? So I can't see a flat roof. I'm sat here with a dormer window in front of me. I couldn't see that flat roof from ground level. I can't say further investigations just because I can't see it. That's not an acceptable choice. I have to say, no, I can't see it. But, however, if I was seeing a defect elsewhere that could be affecting that roof, that section that I can't see, then I have to recommend further investigation. In fact, the standards say you must recommend further investigation. So we know in an RICS guidance document, it uses the word must. That is obligatory. It's not an optional. Should allow some wriggle room. Must is definite. So if you see a defect, and that defect may be affecting an additional element of the building, you have to recommend further investigation. So key one there for me is damp to a ground floor wall. So if the ground floor wall is damp, chances are the floor that abuts that wall is going to be damp. It's either, there's either a damp problem underneath it or there's something else happening. But, if the two are in connection, one is unlikely to be dry and the other is unlikely to be wet. They must, if it's been going on long enough, they will be similar. So if you've got a damp wall, you're going to have to investigate the floor. The HCS says HSS says you must investigate that floor. Of course, we have to really well define what we mean by investigate that floor, and perhaps we'll touch on that when we talk about damp specifically. But it says you have to do it. Now, of course, the challenge slightly when it comes to level 3 surveys is that under the description of the service in the Home Survey standards, it says that recommendation for further investigation should be an exception, not the rule at level 3, which personally I feel is a slightly unhelpful thing, because in one section we're saying you have to do it in these circumstances. In the next section we're saying, well, don't do it too much. Well, which is it? It's either a requirement or it's not. Now, I think what they're trying to say there, and I think what it needs a bit of clarity on, is that obviously further investigations are not only required because you've got an element that might be affected by another element that needs some investigation. Sometimes you need a further investigation to determine the extent of a defect, right? Just because physically you can't get at what's happening within one element. So it's not just a different element; it's an element that you can see. Quite often, we use the example of damp. We've got damp, we can't quantify it, we can't establish certain parameters, so we need to investigate that further. But it doesn't explicitly say that in the Home Survey standards. It doesn't say that's an example of when you can use it. It doesn't kind of clarify that. So what we're left with is just this clear idea of, you have to do it here, but you probably shouldn't do it too much. It doesn't work. So we need to kind of, but I think because they've used that phrase in there, that's led some people to believe, okay, well, I have to avoid further investigations, or I can't say that. But it does perhaps touch back a little bit to what we were saying about whether you're competent to do a level 3. If you find yourself constantly referring back for further investigations, there may be something missing in your knowledge. That there's something you're perhaps not understanding. And for me, the way I help clarify that to people is to say, okay, well, look, if you don't know, what those further investigations should look like, if you cannot accurately define them, and one of the requirements under a level 3 is that you should be explaining what those further investigations will look like. If you can't say, they should do X, Y, and Z, and it should be this person that does it, and he might find this thing or this thing, then probably you're just doing it as a caveat. You're doing it because maybe you lack knowledge, and that's a great question to ask any student as soon as they say further investigation required is, okay, what further investigations? And then if they don't know, that that they just there's a lack of knowledge and there's a gap they need to be filled, which is, and again, I would say to people, don't be scared of identifying a gap in your knowledge. I love it when I find a gap because I can then go out and I can fill that gap.
Yeah,
I can plug that hole. And we all have gaps in our knowledge that we didn't know we had until we bump up against them and we plug them as we go along.
Is it also been driven by the fear of claims at some point? If we don't cover ourselves by putting some sort of further investigation recommendation, then I'm likely to get a claim, perhaps. Is that driving that?
There's a big element of that, which I think is difficult. And it's difficult because personally, I don't see where that's come from, because I've not seen any specific evidence that condition-based surveying is a high risk of claims. Realistically, whether that's in my own personal experience or conversations with other people, I mean, yeah, we all get claims. I've had a claim. That's fine. It happens. We all make errors or things happen or what have you. It's not a problem, but they don't happen that often. And when they do, within the surveying, residential condition surveying context, they're relatively low value. The average claim, I mean, obviously we have the big outlier of Heart and Large and fine, but most of it is in the couple of grand, 2,000-3,000. It's not big figures. I get that we've had indemnity insurance prices went up a while ago. They're coming back down again from what I can see, but that wasn't because of claims. Again, I'm not seeing any information. I've not been presented with any information. I've not been told by anybody, including brokers or insurers, that was due to claims. That was due to other factors within the market. So, yeah, and I mean, I can also make a point that just because you recommend a further investigation, I don't think you automatically protect yourself either. And I think this is perhaps a good point to talk about damp specifically, because I would actually say that if you recommend the wrong further investigation or you're unclear on the investigations that should take place, and if a client then acts upon that recommendation and gets the wrong subsequent advice and does the wrong thing, then you as the surveyor are more likely to be found liable than the contractor that did the work. So I give the example of injecting a chemical damp-proof course in a solid walled listed building. Right. So if you were to inject a damp-proof course, which is not going to be a good idea, but just from exclude the pointlessness of it and the potential damage to the building. From a listing point of view, if you should get listed building consent for injecting a chemical DPC. Most people probably don't really think about that. But if I, as a homeowner, as a surveyor, have just put in my report, I found damp, go away and get further investigations from a PCA damp specialist. Damp specialist comes in, says, yeah, inject a damp-proof course, because too many of them do. And they go ahead and do it. Right? Conservation officer comes along and says, all right, why'd you do that? That's that you need to get consent. A homeowner is at risk. But they had a survey. Survey didn't tell them it was a bad idea. Who are they going to look to? The surveyor. So there is you can clearly follow that trail to the surveyor still being liable, even though they think they've covered themselves with their further investigations.
How would you handle that scenario out of interest in terms of how would you word that type of recommendation on advice?
Well, I mean, I would very clearly say this issue is unlikely to be resolved by the injection of a chemical damp-proof course. Fundamentally, we'll include that advice. We know it's true. We need to be really clear and strong in that advice. We need to take that step to say, do it. If you do it, it's a bad idea. If you do it, it's going to be breach of the listing. Even if it's not listed, we know a DPC, particularly injecting a DPC in the outside wall of a cavity wall, is fundamentally pointless. Right? If there's an existing DPC, inject a new one. That's not really doing anything. Say it. Say, the way I tend, particularly, I tend to approach further investigations on damp is the first thing we have to be clear about is the use of a electronic moisture meter is very limited. It doesn't directly tell us that it's damp. To comply with the joint position statement, we should be saying these are some of the other ways that you can investigate the moisture content of the walls. List ones that might be most relevant, but also note that they tend to be invasive, taking samples or what have you. Go on to say, okay, yeah, you need further investigation. Specify who should carry that out, whether it's an independent specialist or PCA, or whatever your platform is for doing that. But also say what those investigations are going to be. So again, this is where we come back to our joint position statement, talking about different types of moisture investigation. Obviously, we talk about some of the possible causes, and we talk about some of the possible remedies. And in that, we can talk about the remedies that aren't relevant, injecting the damp-proof course. But we also need to say, then we jump over to flaws, further investigation is required, and that investigation should involve lifting the floor coverings and lifting the carpets. And for me, that's a very strict thing in that, because you cannot investigate, particularly, obviously we were talking about a first floor wall or a roof leak or whatever, fine, that's separate. But if we're talking about damping a ground floor wall, you cannot investigate that wall without investigating the floor. Right? You have to get that floor covering. You have to look underneath that floor. And for me, just that simple little line in that, and I would put that line in level. I put that line in level 2 as well. That for me protects your client against the well-meaning but perhaps uninformed damp specialist who comes along with his damp meter and taps against the wall and gets one reading and goes damp-proof course. Because hopefully then they'll come along. In fact, what I actually say is you should not consider the investigations complete unless floorboards and floor coverings have been lifted and the subfloor void has been physically inspected. So if they then get the report back that says, "Oh, I touched my damp meter and got some high readings, didn't look under the floor," they know that investigation is not complete and they shouldn't rely on it. If they choose to rely on it, that's a choice they're making contrary to your advice as the surveyor. So you're kind of more effectively covered.
I think it's a nice example of how you can add detail to the advice to make it clearer and provide more. Are there, because I'm imagining, having done quite a lot of training, you're listing quite a few examples of how people suggest they might investigate. Are there examples you see where either people are too eager in certain parts of the property to recommend an investigation, or conversely, they don't where they should?
As a really good example of the over eager to recommend further investigations, I use an example of a modern building, 2017, truss rafter roof, insulation laid all the way across, so good 300 mil as it should be. Running through it, you've got a duct for mechanical ventilation. Underneath it, you've got some staining around the vent in an ensuite shower room. So the question I always put to students is, okay, well, this is what we got. We've got this stain here. We can see the duct running through the roof space. Picture taken from the hatch, because getting all the way across there is not advisable because you can't do it safely. What do you do next? And the common response is always going to be further investigations required. And I've had similar things from qualified surveyors as well, because of course they can't see the base of where that duct fits into the unit. They can't see the problem, right? Which there's a logic to that, isn't it? Further investigate it further. To me, the logic fails insofar as there is only a limited number of defects that this situation can be causing. We as a surveyor can be fairly safely assume what that range of defects is. We can narrow it down, can't we? We know that it's something that it's not sat at the edge of the building. There's no roof leak, so it's not water pouring in. We know that it's some kind of issue with condensation on the duct and it's draining down. And fundamentally, that's what it is. It's actually because the duct is tucked underneath the insulation in the roof space, and there's all sorts of other problems going on. But it's not. My response is, okay, well, what's the investigation? Investigation could be to go over there and look at it. But what's the repair? What are the likely repairs? Well, they involve going over there, looking at it and fixing it. If it is something that could be fixed by the competent contractor on the stuff they have in their van, it's not an investigation. An investigation is to go out and find out what the problem is, to then go and get the equipment, or to go and tell somebody else or get somebody else in to deal with it. If it's just going to be, if you can investigate and address at the same time, and if you can and again, this takes the knowledge and experience to be able to narrow down the range of defects. So again, if you can't narrow that range of defects down, you probably need to increase your level of knowledge before you kind of inspect that building. Again, these are good ways of telling yourself, okay, well, maybe I'm not competent because I can't narrow down the range reasonably. You can't foresee what the issues that have been created. So yeah, if the same guy's going to investigate it and fix it in the same job, that's not an investigation.
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah. And these are the examples where we're not doing it enough, as far as I'm concerned, or we're doing it too much. We're covering ourselves when we could just be giving some useful information.
Yeah, they're nice examples, I think, on both ways. How you provide better understanding of what to do next in terms of an investigation,
Yeah.
or where you can just eliminate it from the report.
Yeah, I don't see many examples of where people don't recommend further investigations where they should, which I think comes back to the point we touched about concerns about liability and everything else. That's not something that happens, which is for good or bad.
Perfect. Okay, so I think that's been quite interesting. I know with damp specifically, you raised there were sort of times where you might add more detail. Are there different things you might add just in terms of general advice rather than investigations, or does the detail tend to come from sort of recommending an investigation?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always going to be good down to the individual property, isn't it, and causes and everything else. I think we need to certainly as one of the kind of maybe the level of knowledge that's lacking in some surveyors, particularly when looking at traditional buildings, is that better understanding of vapor permeability or breathability, as it's referred to, the different paint types. Some people are good with maybe with the lime plaster and the lime mortar, but also thinking about paint finishes and whether they have the vapor permeability and whether they can affect it. So we need to be, we need to be including that advice as part of the maintenance information we give within our level 3 surveys as well. But we certainly need to be thinking about it in terms of how we consider damp issues. We need. I do feel that as a profession, there is still this slight gap in knowledge. We have people kind of going out and doing level 3 surveys, and saying damp further investigation or put a damp proof course in there. That happens more often than it ever should. It shouldn't happen at all on a traditional building, but it's still out there, and I think we do need to build more knowledge within the profession.
Interesting. Okay, and that ties in nicely, I think, with a couple of other points, and we've discussed these on another podcast episode with Kate Darrington around sort of energy matters, but probably more so climate change risk. But how does that side of the report in a level 3 differ to a level 2 in terms of what you're meant to put in or comment on?
So level one, we merely reference the rating or the ratings. It's a rating plural, and this is a key mistake a lot of surveyors do make, and that's what we do at level 1. We do at level 2 and level 3. So this applies at all levels, but you need to remember there are 2 ratings within an EPC. We have the energy efficiency rating. That's the headline rating. That's the on the front page. It's the one the minimum energy efficiency standards and all your great grants are based on. It's the one we all know. It has a little graph and it's great. And most surveyors have got quite good at doing that one. We also have the environmental impact rating. So that's the one that is a measure of carbon. So my headline rating based on cost, energy rating based on carbon dioxide output or requirements for that property. For residential, for commercial, they're reversed. So the main rating is based on carbon, secondary rating is based on cost. So for residential property, that's we have those 2 ratings. They are both still there. I've had surveyors swear blind to me that one of them's been removed, but it's definitely there. It doesn't have a graph anymore, but it does there, and we do have to put both of them in there. And this is where I have a slight peeve, maybe with the standard RICS template. It's got a box for 1, but not a box for 2. So the standard we have doesn't encourage compliance with the standard. Anyway, I don't want to rant too much, but yeah, we do have. We're told we have to include both ratings. It is a requirement of the Home Service. If you don't include one of them, I'm not sure anybody's going to care, because no one really understands the energy one, but the environmental one. But they do know the energy one. So it is but it's there, required to do it. Anyway, that's all we have to do on level 1. Level 2, we've got to check the EPC for discrepancies, and that's a kind of a big topic in itself. What constitutes a discrepancy? What's actually a factor of the way EPCs are produced and how they're perceived? but we do have to note where they're wrong. Level 3, we do have to step up a little bit, and we have to actually consider the validity of some of the recommendations within the EPC. So is it valid to put solid wall insulation on, or underfloor insulation, or what have you? Overriding all of that is a requirement to report on any defects or deficiencies caused by energy measures. So if, for example, solid wall insulation has been applied and it's causing a problem. Now, what I always say is interesting, because you have that overriding one to spot the defects and deficiencies, you need exactly the same knowledge to do that as you do for the requirements to check the recommendations. So you have to be able to look at recommendations and say, okay, is that appropriate? That's exactly the same thing as saying all the recommendations in place now, is it appropriate? So what we have to do under level 1, we have to have the same competency as what we have to do under level 3. So it should be relatively easy for surveyors to do all of those. They maybe don't. that's what, but it's certainly something we should all be doing. You can, of course, go further and give better recommendations for energy efficiency and break it down and be more. And again, I tend to encourage people to do that. Yeah. Again, we have the retrofit standards. We're not talking about full retrofit relevance, but we can give some better information about energy efficiency. You know, even simple stuff like making sure a smart meter is fitted. That reduces can help to reduce your energy costs. So why don't we tell people to do that? Why aren't we encouraging people to do that within our survey reports?
Interesting. I think there's a lot of nice points we touched on. Is there anything else you'd like to add around sort of detail in reports?
If you've had Kate talking about it, I'm not going to bore everybody else with the same, because she knows what she's talking about, and she's probably given you all the information that you can ever possibly know on the subject.
I love that. Yeah, well, definitely worth checking that one out as well then. Well, thank you for coming on today, Tim. It's been really interesting going through all the different topics today. If anyone wants to get in touch with you to learn more around level 3s, etc., how do they get in touch?
LinkedIn is always good. On them, I should be, so you can just contact me through there, or drop me an email to tim@tksurveying.co.uk. I'm not too difficult to find, and I'll certainly happily share my opinions where I can.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on again, and hopefully once the the new standards out and it's embedded for a bit, we can sort of have another discussion around changes.
Looking forward to seeing those.